So what am I thinking about this morning as I manage my auction house alt here? So what's on my mind now is the way war is supposed to work in the United States, how it used to work in the United States, how it works now, and how did we get from the way it used to work to the way it works now. So the way that war is supposed to work under the Constitution is pretty straightforward. Is that, there is a nation or other entity that the United States is horribly aggrieved at, and so the president goes to Congress and gets a declaration of war against that entity, and as part of that declaration, that declaration of war, by the way, is a joint resolution. It doesn't require president's signature. It typically outlines the grievances that we have with that nation or entity. Sometimes it will authorize specific retaliations, but more commonly, it's just like, we're at war, president, go win this war, right? That's the way that for nearly 200, well, I guess 190 years of the Republic, that we that war worked. Like even World War II, that's the way it worked. Like the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and you would think that, oh, okay, war, we that just Roosevelt, go win that, go beat those Japs. No, Roosevelt goes in December 10th. He makes his speech before Congress. Congress votes unanimously, joint resolution of war, and now we are at war with Japan. Still not at war with Germany, right? December 11th, I think it's December 11th, Germany declares war on the United States, and in response to their declaration of war to us, Roosevelt goes back to Congress, gets another joint resolution of war against Germany and Italy, and then we're at war with all three of them, right? That's the way war is supposed to work, right? But what has happened is there were two things that happened. The first thing is that at times a military situation will arise that requires immediate response with no time to go to Congress. So like for example, when North Korea invaded South Korea, there was no, if we had taken 4 days to get a joint resolution of war, it would have been over, right? They had already pushed the South Korean forces to the Pusan perimeter, which is just like a little sliver on the coast, and so we had to act without a war, and to shoehorn that, without a joint resolution of war, to shoehorn that in, right? Truman's like, well, we already have authorization to act as part of a UN force. We can commit, and so the U.S. never declared war on North Korea. Instead, the United Nations decides to militarily intervene, and the U.S. is the predominant force in the UN's military. And so we end up at war in a war state without ever going through the way that. And then at a kind of a similar situation, we never declared war in Vietnam. What happened was, we put it, I think it was the end of the Eisenhower administration where we first put military advisors into South Vietnam with the intent of helping the South Vietnamese military become more effective against the incursions by the North. But then under Kennedy, that was greatly expanded, and they're like, well, if we've got the military advisors in there anyway, there's no reason that they can't also engage in military activity as part of their advising to the South. So we end up in armed conflict with those North Korean insurgents and agents without ever getting a declaration of war. Now, technically, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution authorized specific military actions and is often considered to be the equivalent of a declaration of war, in that it did authorize President Johnson to execute military actions against, but there was never a declaration of war. So these set a precedent. So we get up to Reagan. Reagan just fairly routinely engages in military actions, always under the auspices that, hey, these are situations that precluded me going to Congress for some reason. Like the invasion of Grenada is like, oh, secrecy precluded us getting a joint declaration of war, or the surprise attacks on Tripoli in response to Libyan terrorism. And like, well, we're not going to get a declaration of war on that. And the other foundation of those actions were, these aren't wars. These are limited military actions with very well-defined objectives. We're going to get in and get out. And then, so scroll all the way up to today, right? And now we've got not just President Trump, but like going all the way back to Bush. We have extended military operations, and there's never a joint declaration of war, a joint resolution declaring war, which is what the Constitution requires. That's not something that is implied by the. It is black and white. Congress declares war, President executes it. That is the and we've decided, we're just going to ignore that. We're not. Yeah, and I think that's bad. What should happen, like right now, what should happen is conservative Republican senators and representatives. So if anybody has a inroad into a conservative, and you know, I live in Oklahoma, where all of our representatives and senators are conservative, but I've tried to arrange meetings with them. There's been no response. But anyway, someone needs to get to them and say, hey, go introduce a joint declaration of war. List, all the egregious things that the Iranian regime has done in the past 47 years. Acknowledge that, hey, you may not like the fact that we're at war, but Iran has been at war with us for 47 years. Like, they have been actively engaged in a war with the United States for 47 years. And so just acknowledge that and say, okay, it's time for us to win that war. And then put people on the record, Republicans and Democrats, as being either supporting Iran or supporting the United States in ending the war. Right? That's what needs to happen. And then if it passes, which I think that it would, I think it would be close, well, relatively close. I don't think it would be unanimous the way that, the declaration of war against Germany and Japan were, but I think it would carry. And then from a conservative Republican standpoint, you've got all of those Democrats on the record voting against America, which, if you're a conservative Republican, that would be a good thing. Even if you lost the resolution, you would have all those people on record as being. And if you lose the resolution, if you introduce the resolution and it fails, then President Bush has an easy out. He's like, oh, the Constitution Congress didn't declare war by under the Constitution. I've got to cease military action and get out of that entire engagement, which I think he wants. I think he wants that anyway. So yeah, so that's my little soapbox on war.